Thank you, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. Today is the day when we celebrate the final episode of the Christmas story, not on the high note of a feel-good soapy series, but on a somber, low note of betrayal, deception, murder, and exile, much like Game of Thrones. Sadly, this ending is going to be repeated in a later series, when the baby whose birth we are celebrating now becomes the man on the cross. For those of you who might have missed a few episodes, let's begin with a brief recap of the story so far. In obedience to the decree sent out by Caesar Augustus, Mary and Joseph embark on the long journey from Galilee to Bethlehem. As this is Joseph's hometown, they no doubt expect family members to give them a hearty welcome and invite them to stay. No such luck. Desperate for shelter, they finally resort to a cave, used for centuries by shepherds as a shelter for the ewes to give birth to their baby lambs. And it is here that their little lamb is born. The arrival of the shepherds comes as no surprise to the new mom and dad. The hills around Bethlehem are where the temple sheep are born and bred. When you take into account the number of sheep sacrificed daily at the temple and up to 250,000 at Passover, there must have been a lot of shepherds on the hills that starry night. If it came as a surprise to be rejected by family members, it's even more of a surprise that there is an empty cave available. I would call it a miracle. Mary and Joseph seem to be in no hurry to return to Nazareth. Perhaps the family member takes pity on them and invites them to stay. Or maybe their reluctance is caused by the scandal caused by Mary's unplanned pregnancy. Whatever the reason, just when everything seems to have returned to normal, their lives are turned upside down again by the arrival of some very unexpected guests. And now for the final episode of Series 1. Who can these strangers be? 2 centuries later, Tertullian, a church leader, will suggest that they are kings, because the Old Testament predicts that kings will come and worship the Christ. We heard that in our first reading. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Herds of camels will cover your land, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. He will also conclude that there were 3 of them, based on the number of gifts mentioned in Matthew's Gospel. 400 years later, the Magi will be given names: Melchior, Balthazar, and Caspar, and nationalities. But who are they really? Tradition makes the 3 kings the heroes of the final episode of this particular series. But let's examine the facts and decide for ourselves whether they are kings or cowards, and to be brutally blunt, whether they really are wise. Balaam is the first wise man to be recorded in Scripture, and even his donkey was wiser than he was. The wise men may get a lot of brownie points for theology and astronomy, but not very many for politics. For pagan tourists who waltz into Jerusalem and ask for the location of a newly born king of the Jews, especially to the reigning king of the Jews, is not a smart political move. Moreover, these so-called wise men agree to meet with Herod after they have found the baby and blindly trust him about wanting to worship the infant usurper to his throne. The warning signs are clear. Matthew tells us, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. The note of fear and opposition caused by Jesus' birth is blatantly obvious to everyone except the wise men. Herod's fear is shown again by his secret meeting with only the Magi present. His questions require accurate answers as to the timing of the birth and the location of the child. But still, they suspect nothing sinister. They blindly trust Herod's lies, even though he is a well-known psychopath who is paranoid about keeping his throne for himself. Caesar Augustus is recorded as saying he would rather be Herod's pig than Herod's brother. Whatever the case, the Magi eventually find the child they are seeking and are wise enough to recognize him as the real king they have traveled so far to find. They are also wise enough to trust a dream rather than a king and return home via another route. Kings or cowards? In our imaginary soapy, we see them riding regally off into the sunset, mission accomplished, to while away their lives in comfort and luxury in a far-off land. God's promise to Abraham that all nations of the earth will be blessed and that all tribes and tongues will be included in God's plan of salvation is at last coming true. Hallelujah. Or are they in fact cowards who, having been made aware of their enormous blunder, choose to disappear without a trace, rather than return to Herod's palace and face the music of their folly? By returning to their country by another route, they leave the infant Jesus and everyone else his age to face the consequences of their visit to Herod alone. In the end, do they choose to save only themselves, ignoring the long shadows of suffering they have caused while standing in the light of the newborn king? By skulking surreptitiously away, they won't have to listen to the voice in Ramah, the wailing and loud lamentations of Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Under the guise of being wise, history has largely absolved them of being catalysts of an infanticide and laid the blame solely at Herod's feet. Matthew's story of the visit of the Magi and subsequent slaughter of the innocents in the verses to come renders an accurate but also difficult picture of the world into which Jesus came. Judge for yourself the facts. Were the Magi wise kings or selfish cowards? What would you have done had you been in the sandals of the Magi? Judge for yourself the facts while we pause for an ad break. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Herod is a worried man. Who is this Herod, the king of the Jews? It's time for a quick flashback. Herod was born in about 70 BC in Idumea, the area we now know as Petra in Jordan. His father was a good friend of Julius Caesar and was put in charge of public affairs in Judea. To make a long story short, through numerous ruthless political intrigues, Herod persuaded Mark Antony to appoint him as Tetrarch of Judea. Herod overthrew the reigning Hasmonean king and married his daughter. In about 37 BC, he was granted the title of King of Judea by the Roman Senate. A power struggle between Mark Antony, Cleopatra, and Caesar Augustus, another couple of convenient political marriages, and a few assassinations later, at the age of about 33, Herod was firmly ensconced as king of the Jews. But even with Roman support, his position was tenuous. He was not of David's royal line. In fact, he was not even Jewish. His mother was an Arab. So he received absolutely no support from the people over whom he had been appointed to rule. By the time Jesus is born, Herod is about 70 years old. Kidney disease and gangrene cause him such pain that he has attempted suicide more than once. He is so paranoid about his safety that he has a personal bodyguard of 2,000 highly trained soldiers. So why is Herod worried today? Why would such a person turn to the people's chief priests and teachers of the law and ask them to search the Hebrew scriptures for answers to anything? Herod obviously doesn't care about the scriptures when it comes to his faith or his lifestyle. Herod lives only for Herod. Why would a Jewish book suddenly become an authority when searching for the so-called king of the Jews? Rome is the ultimate authority, and he is king of the Jews. Why does Herod take the prophecy seriously enough to dispatch troops to Bethlehem to kill all the little boys who live there in order to wipe out the Davidic dynasty once and for all? Rumors. Pernicious, non-stop rumors. They were probably started quite a while ago by a troublemaking priest called Zechariah. According to the stories circulating on social media, he apparently saw an angel while he was safely ensconced alone behind a veil in the Holy of Holies. Anyone can play dumb if they want something badly enough. Prophecies may be a load of hogwash, but rumors, there's no smoke without a fire, and these rumors just wouldn't go away. Then more recently, there were rumors from some shepherds who cared for the temple sheep. They were all agog a while ago when they brought the next lot of sacrificial lambs to the temple. Apparently, there had been some angels who told them to look for a baby in a manger. Shepherds are the lowest of the lowest on the social scale, so their stories can be interpreted as drunken dreams. But then the Pharisees and the Sadducees had come to him with tales of an old man and an old woman at the temple who had been in raptures about a baby boy born to be a light to the Gentiles and the glory of the people Israel. Dementia? Confused ramblings of a couple of religious nuts? According to the rumors, Simeon had even called the baby the Lord's Messiah. And now the Magi have come all the way from the east with a similar story. Perhaps it's time to check it out. King Herod, smiling that syrupy smile of his, tells the wise men, "Thanks for dropping in. Let me do some checking out and I'll get back to you." Which, in king talk, says, if there's a new king out there, he won't be around for long. How can it be possible that the long-promised Jewish Messiah can be so weak and so small, and heaven forbid, born in a shepherd's cave, while Herod the Great, king of the Jews, has built not one, but 5 of the biggest fortified palaces in the world, and has power, comfort, and glory never before known to man? The Bible writers ask for an unbelievable commitment of faith. They ask those early believers to trust God, that the King of the universe is not in a palace. He is in a shepherd's cave, and Herod, for all his glory, is a nothing. Mary believes it. Joseph does. The shepherds do. The wise men do. And many other folk do too. Do you? There is one man that day who believes it with all his heart, and his name, Herod. When he hears for the umpteenth time that a Messiah, a king, has been born to the Jews, even if it is a king in a cage, it scares him almost to death. So much so that out of his fortress come his troops to go and slaughter all the baby boys in Bethlehem and surrounds in an attempt to kill the newborn king. God never ceases to amaze. Why would he choose to put the greatest of all usurper kings on the stage when his son was born? May be hard to comprehend. But it is abundantly clear that he wanted a commitment from his people that the Messiah, for all his apparent weakness, is the real king of the universe. Not Herod, not Caesar Augustus, not Alexander the Great, nor any king known before or since. When I visited Israel a few years ago, a couple of things came to mind as I stood in the ruins of Herodion. This is the largest of Herod's palace fortresses and the one where he is buried. It is built on a man-made mountain about 12 kilometers south of Jerusalem and only 4 kilometers southeast of Bethlehem. Its skyscraping towers were clearly visible from Jerusalem. The entire fortress was clearly visible from Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph would have seen it towering over them as they neared their destination. The shepherds would have grazed their sheep on its grassy slopes. And the Magi could not possibly have missed it. Herod's overpowering presence was there, even if he himself was absent. Herod built palaces and fortresses all over the country, showing power and might never seen before or since, even greater than Rome, to whom he owed his position. He was regarded by the people of his day as one of the greatest, most powerful men who had ever lived. Herod the Great to the Romans, but Herod the Monstrous to the Jews, and Herod the Coward to history. Herod was not only a man who killed baby boys at Christmas time. He was a man who was so worried that no one would mourn his passing that he ordered the death of hundreds of both Roman and Jewish aristocracy to be carried out the moment he died, to ensure loud weeping and wailing throughout the land. Our King shows us strength in weakness, majesty in meekness, deity in manhood. Maybe the wise men really were wise after all. They looked at Herod in all his pomp and glory, full in the face, and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" And now, for something completely different, it's time to pray.